The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, hi everyone. Welcome to the webinar today. We're pretty happy to have you here. My name is Troy, and I'm a product manager here at Grape City. I'm also here joined with a couple of the members from the ActiveReports team, Mateen and Evan. Would you guys mind introducing yourselves?
Hey guys, this is Mateen Feroz. I am the product manager for the ActiveReports product line.
Hello everyone, my name is Evan Warren. I'm a technical engineer that supports ActiveReports .NET and ActiveReportsJS.
Awesome. Thanks, Mateen. Thanks, Evan. I appreciate you both helping out today. So I want to thank each of you for joining us in the webinar today as well. I know you all have busy schedules, and I want to make the most out of your time, so let's get right into it. Today, we'll be discussing how to create reports for web applications. And to give you a better idea of what will be covered, let's look at the agenda. So first, we will give a quick overview of reporting and some of the challenges faced when building reporting software for applications. Next, we'll dive right into creating a report with the new ActiveReportsJS designer. And then we'll take that report file and we'll add it to, and along with ActiveReportsJS components, and add those to a web application. So along the way in that process, we'll highlight some key features of reporting solutions and why they're useful. And at the end of our presentation, we'll have some time to answer some of your questions. So as we are going through this webinar today, please feel free to go ahead and add your questions and post them in the questions section as we proceed. So by the end of this webinar, I have a few goals, and one is for everyone to have a solid understanding of some of the challenges that are faced when creating reports and reporting software. I want everyone to be able to understand some of the reporting or the workflow of creating reports and integrating them into your systems, and also understand essentially what ActiveReports.js is. So I'm sure many of you are curious about this new product, and we'll talk about it more as we progress. So before we get started, I'm curious to see who's already familiar with ActiveReports. So I want to pose a question for you all. Just give me a second here. And if you can go ahead and take a moment to answer this poll, this will help me get a better understanding of who's out there and what your level of experience is with reporting software in general. So take a moment, fill that out, and we'll close it down here in a second. Okay, it looks like we got most of the responses in. So I'm gonna go ahead and close the poll now. Okay, so we have a pretty even distribution here. So about 25% of you are pretty new to ActiveReports, or about half of you really. 25% haven't heard of or used ActiveReports at all. And then several of you, a significant amount actually, about half of you have used it for about 2 years or more. So it's a pretty good even distribution. So if you aren't familiar with ActiveReports in general, don't worry, we're going to get you up to speed. If you are familiar with reporting software, then one of the things that we all know is that reporting software is pretty difficult to get right. So depending on your requirements and what type of reporting needs you have for your application, it can require a huge investment of resources. And if your team is not familiar with some of those challenges, it can cost you a lot of time and money. So I'd like to bring Mateen in on this discussion, as he's worked closely with the product for many years and has a lot of experience with reporting solutions. So Mateen, would you mind expanding upon some of these challenges that go into creating reporting software?
Sure. Thanks, Troy. Yes, so as Troy hinted at earlier, we have ActiveReports has been in the business for quite some time, for over 25 years. And we've accumulated quite a bit of experience throughout these years under our belts when it comes to reporting solutions. So we've heard, from a lot of customers, and I guess the issues that the customers face when looking at software, or looking at even creating their own software. We can categorize them into a few different categories. The first challenge that people face when it comes to reporting solutions is that the users don't have the level of detail, access to the level of detail that they need. So for example, an administrator would have a different level of access to data as opposed to a general user. So how do we give that level of access to our end users? This is one of the main things that we hear a lot from our clients. And then the other issues that come across, especially this is true with the financial sector, those in the government sector, they have very stringent restrictions that the report has to be a certain way. Banks, they have certain very strict requirements that the reports and the text and the styling and the fonts have to be a certain size and a certain style. So these are some of the restrictions that they have to meet in order to for a report to be approved to be dispersed to their users. So being able to style the reports in a sort of a WYSIWYG way, so that you design it, and then when you actually render the report, it displays as you design it. So this is a very, very important point for anyone doing reports, because you don't want to place a chart in a certain place, and then when you render a report or you export the report, it shows up in a different area. So you want to have a WYSIWYG type of a report generating tool. At the same time, you want to be able to have export functionalities to different export formats. So for example, the very minimum, you should be looking at the PDF, Excel, and HTML. These are the essentials for any reporting solution, and these are when it's the report is exported to these formats, that WYSIWYG layout has to maintain. Otherwise, what's the point of exporting something that doesn't maintain its layout format? And these are some of the issues that, again, our customers tend to face. Making sure that when a report is printed, that the images and the charts, they show up pixel perfect. These are some of the issues, on the client side that they face, especially in printing. How do you print on the client side when you're working in a browser format, in a browser environment? And then lastly, for the developer, the developer having access to the right tools, the right controls to display your data. For example, you don't want to display financial data, with general purpose charts. You don't want to display financial information, in pie charts or bar charts. You want to have financial charts to display these types of data. You want to have the right tools to represent your data. These are the important things that everybody is looking for. These are the challenges that everybody is facing, and these challenges are even more compounded when it comes to the browser environment, as I mentioned, because the software is limited by the browser that it's using. So in the next slide, we'll be talking about once you have these challenges, what do you do with those? Do you build your own, or do you buy something that's already made? And Evan can attest to this, that we've had several customers, countless times that we've had conversations with customers, pre-sales customers, that they have created their own software for when it comes to reporting, custom style to their needs. However, the cost of maintaining that is just too much for them, so they are looking for something that they can rely on others to maintain it, but they can customize it to fit their needs. And so this was basically our source of interaction with them when it came to the ActiveReports team. So when you're looking at building or creating, building your own application, what does it involve? Obviously, the cost of development is huge, because these are the features you want to have at a very minimum. You want to be able to create something that renders a WYSIWYG result. You want to have the printing and exporting functionality embedded into your software. Again, controls making sure that all of the controls are there. You can obviously, there's software that you can get, open source software that you can get for each control, but each of these would have its own features. Feature sets, and the APIs will be different. So how do you integrate them together into a single software? It becomes very, very confusing, very, very difficult. Keeping the technical and non-technical folks in mind when you're creating the software. When you are making a designer for the report designers, are they technical users or are they non-technical users? And the UI should be very intuitive, should be very logical, should be very familiar to them. And these are some of the things that from a development perspective, you need to keep in mind. And then on top of that is the cost of maintenance, like I mentioned, because a lot of times when companies build their software, they're not able to retain the developer that built the software. So they get a new developer, and then the developer turnover is huge for them, is a huge cost for them. And these are the main reasons that we have customers always coming to ActiveReports and trying out ActiveReports and purchasing ActiveReports from us. One of the main reasons that we have our customer base that we do. So now, we understand the idea of buying versus purchasing. So then let's proceed to the next slide. Some of the features when you are looking for purchasing a reporting solution, these are the minimum that you need to have, that any solution needs to have. These are the minimum features that your solution should have if you were going to be purchasing a reporting solution. The very first thing is you want to be able to design, flexibly design your layouts flexibly. You want to have templates that you can reuse over and over again as a starting point, as opposed to creating everything from scratch. So you want to have a flexible tool that allows you to have templates that you can use. Again, a WYSIWYG layout is a huge thing. This cannot be overlooked. The reporting solution should have importing and exporting capabilities. It should have, at the very minimum, like I mentioned, PDF, Excel, and HTML exports built into it at the very minimum. These are the top 3 export formats for any company. And then, of course, if it has interactivity, for example, drill downs and drill throughs and filtering and sorting, these are a great addition to any reporting solution. In addition, the majority of the reports that we create generally would have a table format or a tablets in there. So ability to use expressions, ability to use grouping in these controls is huge. In expressions specifically, they allow you to do a bit of dynamic reporting that based on a specific user, you're able to change the presentation of the data. As an example, and there's a lot more uses for expressions, aggregation or so I'll leave it at this. There's a lot more that we can say about the features that you want to have at one company to another, but at the very minimum, these should be at the top of the list for anyone. So throughout this demo, you'll see how ActiveReportsJS addresses these needs and these challenges when it comes to reporting, and how reporting is made easier in ActiveReportsJS. And with that, I'll hand it over to Troy.
All right, thanks for sharing that insight. I think we all have a pretty good understanding of the goal of enterprise solutions now, or at least enough to progress through our discussion, which is revolving specifically around ActiveReportsJS. So let's talk about what exactly is ActiveReportsJS. All right, so formally, it is defined as a lightweight JavaScript reporting tool for creating and embedding reports into enterprise web applications. So some of you may be wondering, especially those who have had past experience with ActiveReports.net, what's the difference? So one of the main things that you probably have noticed from the name itself is that ActiveReportsJS is completely implemented in JavaScript. So it's a client-side tool. There are no back-end languages included like C# in the development process. So as a JavaScript tool, it can be used in the browser without any server dependencies. It's also designed specifically for web applications, and we took the reporting engine from ActiveReports.net and we implemented it in JavaScript. So what happens is when you take a report and you feed it through the reporting engine, it's generated, rendered, and displayed in the viewer all in the browser. So that's one of the key differences, is that the report generation and rendering is all happening on the client. Now, ActiveReports is also referred to as a lightweight reporting tool, which means that it's not an all-in-one solution for reporting scenarios. It's best when you're creating reports that can be handled within the browser. And some examples of this might include order confirmations, inventory reports, or daily performance reports for your employees or for your sales team and things like that. So here are a few examples of some reports that you may create with ActiveReportsJS. So we have an invoice report, a product price list, and a catalog of demographics by state. So to give you a better idea of what it's like to create these reports, let's jump into the demonstration. And Evan is going to demonstrate the report creation process using the ActiveReportsJS designer. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'll hand it over to you, Evan.
Thanks, Troy. Hello, everyone. Just give us a few seconds while the ActiveReports designer can show you the demo.
So while Evan is getting that set up, one thing that's really cool about the designer that Evan's going to show you here in a second is that it is, you can install it on Mac, Windows, or Linux desktops. So it's a cross-platform designer tool, and there's no dependencies on what machines you're using in order to design your reports. All right, so it looks like we're good to go.
All right. Thanks, Troy, and thanks everyone for waiting. As you can see here, this is the ActiveReportsJS designer. It's similar to the web designer we have for ActiveReports.net. This designer has much more enhancements. So today we're going to just make a simple tabular report. So let's go to the file menu and select a new report. As you can see here, we have two report layouts to choose from, RDL and page report. So RDL reports are the most interactive type of reports that we offer. RDL stands for Report Definition Language. These report types are data-driven, meaning that the report will grow or shrink based on the amount of data and controls that are on the report. Next, we have the page reports, and these reports allow you to create very specific styles of reports that are difficult and precise. They are layout-driven, and they also allow you to control the amount of data that can be rendered on the report. So for our demo today, we're going to select a page report to create this simple tabular report. So let's select page. All right, so now you can see that we selected a page report. So next, what we're going to do is go up to this data tab right here. So if we select it, you'll see that we have a couple options in the data tab. We have the option to configure a data source, data sets, parameters, and also use some of the common values in the report. So what we're going to do is we're going to configure a data source. Brings up this dialog, and you have the option to use data source, or you can pull it from a file. We're just going to pull it from a file for today. I have a simple JSON data file. If we check out the connection string and expand this dialog, you'll see the connection string and where I'm pulling the data file from. So let's head back, let's add the data source. So now we've established a data source in our report. Next, we're going to create a data set. So it brings up a dialog. We're going to name it products because we're going to be looking at data that deals with products. So we're going to look at like beverages, condiments, stuff like that. Next, I'm going to select all the objects in the products array, in this JSON file. So what I'm going to do is go to this query right here and enter in, I'm going to select all the objects in the array. So let's do this real quick. All right, so now I've entered my query. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to go down to this validate button. Essentially what this button is going to do, it's going to validate that this is an actual query. And as you can see, it is valid. If we look at the bound fields, it brought in 10 fields from this products array. So now we're going to select OK. And as you can see now in the data sets, that we can see the products data set and then all the fields that we can use in this data set. So now we got our data configured into our report. Now let's add some tools to it. So let's go over here to this menu item, and you'll see here that we have the Report Explorer, and we have a toolbox down below. So we're going to add the table control to the report. And as you can see here, by default, the table contains 9 cells, and it contains 3 rows. So the first row is the table header. The middle row that you see right here is the detail row. And then the bottom row is the table footer. If you're unsure what which row you're working with, you can see by these icons right here. As you can tell, the icon has a black label on the top row, which indicates the table row. And then you'll see in the detail row that the middle row is highlighted in that icon, and then so on and so forth. So what we're going to do is we're going to add 3 more columns to this report, or to this table. I'm sorry. And then we're going to remove the table footer. We're not going to be needing that. So now let's add some data to this table. So I'm going to select this ellipses in this text box right here, and it's basically going to give us all the options from that products data set that we created. So we're going to add product ID, product name, and then as you guys can see, this is a cool feature with ActiveReports. As I'm adding these fields to the detail row, you can see that the table header is being updated with the field that I'm putting in the detail row. So this is a nice feature to have, because it allows us to kind of create quick and easy reports in ActiveReports and in ActiveReportsJS. All right, so we put some data in the fields right here, and then next, before we preview the data, we're going to look at this gray area down here. So this gray area, which is attached to the table, is the fixed page region. And essentially what this is, it controls the amount of data that's going to be displayed on that page. So for right now, I'm going to set the region to about halfway down so we can see how much data is being displayed on this page. So, all right, so let's preview it. So now, as you can see, that it's just displaying a few records on this page. You see some products here, and then we'll go over to the next page, and you'll see some products as well. And it's going to keep displaying products until there's nothing left to display. So now that's essentially how you can make a quick and easy table, just binding fields to the table itself. So now let's add some grouping into this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click that detail row icon. I'm going to go down the group and insert group. Next, we're going to remove the table header. And what we're going to do again is we're going to essentially we're going to re-add the fields, just so that we can populate this group header right here. So product ID, product name, supply ID, category ID, unit price, and then units in stock. So now that we've set up the new table with the grouping, what we're going to do is we're going to select the whole group itself and head over to the Properties tab, which is right next to the Data tab. In here, we're going to utilize the group expression property. And this is what's basically going to group our data. So we're going to add an item, and then we're going to click this box right next to this text box, and we're going to group the data by the category ID. All right, so now we're grouping the data by the category ID. So now what I'm also going to do is I'm going to add an additional row above this header right here. So let's just add one more, and we're going to put the category ID up top, so we can see what, so we can essentially see what ID and what data is affiliated with that category ID. So now let's expand this fixed page region a little bit. So let's display more data when we preview it. So now let's go back up top. Let's preview it. Now you can see that all this data right here in this grouping is affiliated with category ID 1. And then if you look at the next group, you'll see that all this data is affiliated with category ID 2. Then you'll see, some data spilled over to the next page, and it's still affiliated with category 2. And then you'll see other groups like group 7, and then group 6, and then so on and so forth. So what we're going to do, just to get these in order, because as you saw, the categories were going from 1, 2, 7, 6, so it was kind of out of place, not organized. So we're going to head back to the group and head over to the group properties, and we're going to sort that data. So what we're going to do is use the sort expression property, go down here, we're going to add an item, and then we're going to group it by category ID. So once I've added that field, you'll see this icon right here. It's kind of small, but it's basically indicating how you want to sort your data. You can either toggle it to have your data sorted in ascending order or descending order. All you have to do is just click the button right here, and it will toggle what you prefer. So for right now, we're going to do ascending order so that we can see all the groups together and organized. So let's preview it. And now you'll see, like we saw before, that 1 and 2 came first. And then if we look on the next page, instead of seeing group 7, we see group 3 now. And then on the next page, you'll see 4, 5, and so on and so forth. So that's essentially a way you can sort your data within the table control itself. Next, we're going to do a little formatting in the table itself, because as you can see, some of the data was, it's not clean and presentable. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back. I'm going to center some text boxes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this text box in the detail row, head up here, and we're just going to center it. So I'm going to do this for everything in the detail row itself, to center it so we can, align it and make it presentable. So I'm going to do that with the headers as well. Now, if we take a look at the data, you'll now be able to see that, the table's a little more organized and more structured than what we saw before. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to select this row, and what we're going to do is we're going to bold the field names, just so that we can distinguish, that these are headers and not actually data. All right, so let's preview now. And now you'll see that, the first row is just the header row, and then essentially everything that's falling underneath that is just the data affiliated with those columns. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to do some more customization to the report. So I'm essentially going to alternate the color of the rows in the table itself. So what I'm going to do is, you see the first row here, I'm going to make that gray, and then the second row is going to be white, and then the row after that's going to be gray. So it's basically going to be alternating colors. So first, I'm going to just copy my expression that I made, and we're going to head over here, select this row, and we're going to head over back to the properties. And then we're going to select text box, and then we're going to head down to the background color property. So instead of transparent, I'm going to click the box right here and select expression. What this does is bring up the expression editor dialog. So the expressions are a cool feature when using ActiveReports or ActiveReportsJS, because they allow you to add additional functionality to your report itself. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy in my expression that I made. And essentially, what this expression is evaluating, it's checking whether the row number is an even or odd number. So if it's an odd number, the row is going to be gray. If it's an even number, the row is going to be white. And then another thing to add with the expression editor that's pretty cool is that we have all these operations and functions that you can use within the editor. And if you select one, you can also see the syntax and the description as well as an example of how you can use it. So take advantage of that when you're building work in the design. So, and now you can see that that the rows are alternating colors within each group. And then lastly, the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to get rid of this category ID, because it's really not helping us in the report. So we're going to put a name to that ID. So what I'm going to do is I created an expression like I did for the alternating rows, and we're going to go back here. We're just going to select this cell instead of the complete row itself. And then we're going to right click and then select the cell expression. And we're going to take out this expression right here, and we're going to copy in this expression. So basically, this expression looks pretty complex, but it's very simple. All it's doing is putting a category ID to a name. So we're going to save this, and we're just going to preview it right here. And now you can see that we have, instead of a category ID, we have a category name for each group. So you'll see in the first group it's beverages, condiments, confections, grain, cereal, dairy products, meat, poultry, and produce. So that wraps up, part of my portion of the demo and to show you guys how to create a simple tabular report in the ActiveReports JS designer. I'm going to hand it off to Troy to see if he wants me to cover anything else with the designer.
Yeah, thanks, Evan. Thanks for demonstrating the designer. This is a very important part of the ActiveReports product, and not just ActiveReportsJS, but all ActiveReports products. You need to be able to design reports easily. There's one thing I want to point out here. Evan, can you try saving this report?
Sure.
So when we go to save a report, you'll notice that the file extension on the file name is a little bit different. So if you're used to ActiveReports, you may notice that, yes, RDLX is the default format for default extension, for ActiveReports. But for ActiveReportsJS, we actually created a new extension that is RDLX-JSON. So This basically gives us a JSON-like syntax for the report. So we modified the extension so we're better able to render the reports in the web. Just be aware that if you are considering moving to ActiveReportsJS, then you will need to convert your reports to RDLX-JSON, and you can easily do that by just opening the report in the designer and saving it with the new extension. All right, thanks, Evan. So what we're going to do next is take the report that Evan created and add it to a web application. So while we get things set up, I'm just going to see if we have any other questions here in the queue. All right, looks like they're all answered. Okay, so the first thing I want to show you guys is what comes in the download, because this is how you're going to get started when you're actually using ActiveReportsJS. So we have the designer in this folder, and we also have this folder that includes the JavaScript component files, which is what I'm going to show you how to use. So this is the complete download. There's also a styles folder, which includes a few themes and a CSS file for our viewer. So let's go ahead and get started using these files and adding them to our application. So I have a very, very simple web application here. And the first step is going to be to take the JavaScript files and CSS files from our download and copy and paste them into our application. So I created a vendor folder that has these files that we need. I also just threw the styles, the CSS file in this folder as well for simplicity. If you have bigger or larger applications, you probably want to structure them a little bit differently. But for this example, that should be sufficient. So the first thing you want to do is add a reference to the files that we're going to use. So the main two that you need to get started with ActiveReportsJS is the viewer and the IE polyfill. So if you have users who will be viewing reports on Internet Explorer, then you will definitely need this to make sure that everything is rendered properly and across all browsers, popular browsers. And then the viewer is actually the component that we're going to use to display our report in our application. So IE polyfill is the viewer, and then I'm going to add the CSS file to make sure our viewer is styled appropriately when it's displayed in the browser. So let's save that file. All right, so we've added our references to ActiveReportsJS. So let's start using the code. So the first thing we want to do is we'll add a div or a host element to as a placeholder for our viewer control. So I just created a div here, gave it an ID, a viewer, and now we can instantiate our viewer in our code. So you can see here there's a couple of lines of boilerplate code for the browser just to make sure that everything is set up properly before we start to execute our JavaScript. So in our init function, we're going to create a new ActiveReports viewer object, and we'll just pass the ID to this constructor to create it. And then the next step is just adding the file that we want. So we take the viewer and we open the report file that we created earlier in this session. So I added the report file here in this reports folder. I have another report here as well. But all we're going to do is load this one. And one other thing I want to point out, you see I have this license.js file. So ActiveReportsJS is a product that needs to be licensed when it's deployed in your application. So I'm going to uncomment this. So it just refers to our license file where we make sure that our product is properly licensed so we don't get any issues when we're running it in the browser. All right, so I'm going to spin up a lightweight server here, and then we should be able to see our report here in the browser. So you can see the viewer here and some of the configuration options, and you can also see the report that we just created here as well. All right, so there's a few other components that I want to add to this application, and these are going to be the exports. So each export is an optional feature for including in your application, but if you need it, then you'll definitely need to add references for them. So I've added references for PDF, Excel, and HTML exports. Now, all I've done is updated the references. So let's take a look at this in our browser now. So I'm going to make sure it loads here. Okay, so everything looks pretty much the same, but if you look on the left-hand side here, there's this exports icon. If you click on it, it'll open this panel, and you can see that we now have the option to export to PDF, Excel, and HTML. So we didn't have to write any code to configure this information. We just added references in our application to load these modules. So pretty easy to configure. Now, let's say you have these files loaded in your application, but maybe you don't want everyone to be able to export. So depending on who is accessing these reports, maybe you don't want them to have the ability to export to PDF, for example. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to modify the available exports here. And I'm going to set to I'm just going to pass an array to this object and make sure that this is the right code. All right, so okay. So now our app refreshed. If I go to the exports, now I only have the ability to export to Excel and HTML. So this could be an app level configuration that you configure for your needs based on the reporting access you need for those. So as you can see, embedding ActiveReportsJS in your application is pretty straightforward, very easy to do. There's also some additional configuration options that you have when it comes to the viewer. So you can change what is actually displayed here on the top menu, or if you want exports available here on the side menu, even some of these search or about icons can be configured as well. All right. So I'm going to hand this back over. We're going to migrate back to the slides here. All right. So moving forward, I just want to kind of summarize kind of what we covered today and give you an overview of ActiveReportsJS. So just to break down the two things that we covered. So Evan demonstrated the ActiveReportsJS designer, and I showed you how to use the components to embed them into your application. So these are the main two things that you'll be needing to use when you're using ActiveReportsJS. So the designer gives you the ability to create your report layouts or templates. You can add your data sources and you can use various report controls. Actually, Evan only demonstrated the table, but there's dozens others that are available in that toolbox section along the left-hand side. So feel free to explore those if you do get a chance to try it out. Now, as far as the components go, we took the report that we created with the designer in our application and use it in our application. So we just loaded some CSS and JS files and added references to those and just instantiated the viewer and added our report file in order to view it. So embedding into your application was probably the easiest part of this whole process. But it's impossible to cover all of the features of ActiveReportsJS in a single session. So here are some key takeaways for you to take with you. So one of the things that we mentioned and emphasized was that ActiveReportsJS is a lightweight reporting solution. So it's designed for web development, and unfortunately, we're limited to the limitations of the browser, but web applications are growing and increasing in complexity. So things are only going to get better from here. We also talked about the designer. We mentioned that it's cross-platform, so you can install it on Mac, Windows, or Linux machines. You can create your report templates and layouts and reuse those for future reports. And we highlighted some of the features of the designer and some of the report controls within the designer, like grouping and sorting. We also talked about exporting as well. So there's many other report controls that you can take advantage of as well in the designer, including charts, barcodes, images. There are sub-reports as well, and also interactivity features like drill down and drill through. So we also talked about the new file extension for the ActiveReportsJS files. So they use RDLX JSON instead of RDLX. And you can use the designer to convert those existing RDLX files to RDLX JSON. You can also embed reports very easily into your application, and we walked through those, just took a few steps, and you also have very easy configuration options for the viewer as well. So the exporting options that we have available currently are PDF, Excel, and HTML. And as Mateen mentioned earlier, these are the most common ones. So that kind of wraps up everything that I wanted to cover today. And I'm going to take the time now to answer some questions. So we were able to answer some earlier, but I want to see if any of you have any other questions that we can address now. So let's see what we have.
So Troy, as we're waiting for some questions to come in, I have one. So how does the licensing work for ActiveReportsJS?
So the licensing for ActiveReportsJS is based on deployment. So to use ActiveReportsJS, you can run it on your local host without any licensing. We just include a watermark on the reports. So if you wanted to actually deploy an application using ActiveReportsJS, you would need to purchase a deployment license, which gives you the ability to deploy on a domain or a host name and use it without any restrictions. If you guys have more questions about the licensing, you can check out our website. We have a licensing page that has a bunch of FAQs that explains those as well. All right, so one question that's come in is there an example of using this to consume a C# or Node.js service? Also, is there an example of using this with Angular or React.js? Yes, so I'll answer the latter question first. We do have examples using Angular and React and Vue as well on our demo site. So if you go to the ActiveReportsJS product page and there's a demo link on the first page, you can go to the demos, and we have a sample that actually loads the report viewer and samples in each of those different frameworks. And the other question is there an example of this using consuming C# or Node.js service? Currently, we don't have any samples in our demo Explorer right now that do that, but you can definitely use those backends to feed data to your application. All right, another question we have is ActiveReportsJS automatically included in the ActiveReports 13 license? So the answer to this question is no. ActiveReportsJS is a separate product from ActiveReports 13, so the licensing models are different and the pricing is different. They're not sold together, and the reason why we do that is they both are built to handle different types of reporting scenarios. So there's not necessarily a huge overlap of when you would use ActiveReportsJS or ActiveReports.net at the same time. They're usually one or the other. Can you combine multiple reports and run once? Yeah, you can definitely do that. So one of the features that we didn't cover today was using subreports. So you can actually take one report and embed it into another report and display them both at the same time when you're at runtime or when you're previewing them. All right, so the last question is, when exporting to Excel, can you export Excel formulas? It's a great question. So that is a question that I actually do not know the answer to at the very moment, but I could find it out really quick for you. So I will get in contact with you directly to answer that question for you. But maybe Mateen, do you know if that is a supported feature?
So I think the limit of it is exporting formulas. I'm sorry, exporting expressions. So the expression will essentially export as a text value in the style. So it won't actually export as a formula.
Okay. So great question. I appreciate it. Let's see if we have any more.
So Troy, I had one question sent to me, and I think might be beneficial for everyone if we can answer this as well. Okay. If you can answer this as well. Basically, I had the question sent saying, let's see, can we attach callbacks to click events on objects that appear in the report? For example, if a sales reports lists customer name, to be able to click on the customer name and execute a callback in the application to open a customer screen. Do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, so within the viewer, I don't believe that is a functionality of the viewer control. There's probably some workarounds that you could try that I think may or may not be a good solution for what you're trying to do, but in general, no, that is not a supported feature.
Yes. And the other thing that I'd like to add to that is that, as I mentioned earlier, ActiveReportsJS does support drill down and drill through. So if somebody clicks on, for example, a customer name, you can drill through to another report if that's what you wanted to display. But I think you're right, Troy, that it does not. We don't have the hooks there to call another window or to open another window, basically.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thanks, Mateen. So it looks like we're running out of time here. So I just want to provide a few more resources for you guys to help you get started. So if you want to check or learn more about ActiveReports, I would start by downloading the trial on the website, and to get a better idea of the types of reports that you can create, head over to our demos and check out the report samples that we have. There's code snippets there, so you can copy and paste them and run them on your own machine if you'd like. But a demo is probably the best place for you to get a better idea of what reports you can build. We also have great documentation. So if you're curious to learn more about the designer and how to design reports and use all the different features there, the documentation would be the best place for you to start there. We also have support and community forums available. So if you're starting your trial, that includes unlimited support. So you can reach out to our support team and get help as you need. We also have our sales team available as well. If you are interested in purchasing, you can reach out to them at that email address. So if you have any additional questions, or if there's something that we didn't cover today that you'd like to get answered, please feel free to contact any of us. We'd love to hear what feedback you have or any suggestions that you could make to make our product better. So I want to thank you all for joining us. I hope this was well worth your time, and have a great day.